devoted to the supernatural. Works of fiction about ghosts and ghouls and things that go bump in the night clearly sell. The internet and television have cashed in on the fad. It's big business, and it's a growing market. In 1950, 10% of the public told a Gallup poll that they believed in ghosts. A similar poll in 2008 put the number at 40%. So what is going on? What do we mean by the supernatural? What is the appeal of ghosts? Why do some people feel the need to visit a haunted house or consult a medium? Are there rational explanations for the apparently inexplicable? Is our fascination with the supernatural filling a vacuum once occupied by traditional religion? Join me to discuss the supernatural are Gordon Smith, one of Britain's best-known psychic mediums, the Reverend Anthony Delaney, pastor of Ivy Church, Manchester, and Professor Christopher French, head of the Anomalistic Psychology Research Unit in the Department of Psychology at Goldsmiths College, London. Gordon, you're a psychic medium.
Yes.
Do you have a supernatural gift?
I wouldn't call it supernatural. I think it's quite natural that people whose consciousness live on after death want to come back and help to heal their grieving loved ones on this side. So I don't see that as supernatural. Obviously, it's seen as supernatural by psychologists, psychiatrists and people like that, and even within the churches. But I don't think there's anything more natural that when we love someone, we want to come back and heal them and take away their grief, their tears.
But you have a gift that others don't have.
Well, yes, in the sense that I do actually communicate with the consciousness of people who have passed out of this world and gone into what I would call the other side, a world of light.
Have you always been aware of this gift?
From as young as 7, I remember seeing for the first time a full-blown spirit materialisation, which I think freaked out my mum and dad.
You use the word spirits. Are these people ghosts? Is there a distinction between spirits and ghosts?
No, I mean, a ghost is not a spirit. You cannot communicate with a ghost. There's a difference for me. I tend myself not to believe in ghosts. I don't believe in such things as haunted houses, only haunted people.
Anthony, do you believe in the supernatural?
Well, I'm a Christian, so I believe in a supernatural God who created everything. I believe also that he has supernaturally spoken to us in various ways through prophets throughout the ages, and ultimately, as an evangelical Christian, I would point people to the Bible. I believe I've seen people being healed. I believe that God does miracles, not did miracles. Jesus Christ, ultimately, when he came in the flesh, did miracles. I'm not going to rationalise those things away. I believe those things are still part of our heritage today in the church.
Chris, you're the editor of The Skeptic magazine, so I can't imagine you're into the supernatural.
I'm not into it in the sense that I believe in it. I'm into it in the sense that I find it really, really interesting. I mean, there's no doubt at all that people throughout the centuries, at any point on the planet, have reported weird experiences that they have explained in supernatural or paranormal terms. That might suggest at first glance that these things are real, but the more I've looked into it, the more sceptical I've become, and I think that we can explain away the vast majority, possibly all, of these kinds of experiences in psychological rather than parapsychological terms.
What do you mean by the term supernatural? What would be a supernatural event?
I think it's interesting. People tend to use the term supernatural and paranormal interchangeably, and I will tend to do that myself quite often. People who think there is a distinction, it tends to be that the supernatural is almost by definition something which could never be explained in terms of the laws of science. Whereas when it comes to the paranormal, there are those people who believe that ultimately science will expand and will encompass those kinds of phenomena and will explain them.
Gordon, let's just talk a little bit about your experience, because you bring messages from the dead, from people on the other side. What's happening? What are you doing when you're engaged in that activity?
The first thing I'm doing is to try and get a sense of something strange. I feel my whole body vibrating. It's very paranormal, not supernatural, very paranormal. Then I will, in my mind, literally open up a conversation. That conversation may be answered in like my own inner voice, the way I talk to myself, the way we all address ourselves inwardly. I may see pictures the way some people will dream. The ultimate thing I ask when I start this is, can I please help this person?
What is the source of this gift? Who gave you this gift?
I think it's just a heightened sense of awareness. Some people do have extraordinary abilities to play music, paint, capture a moment in photography or whatever. To me, since I was a kid, nobody taught me to do it. There was nothing in my family that said I should follow on in anything. It just started to happen very, very naturally.
Anthony?
While I can understand from what Gordon's saying in his heart that he wants to help people, that can actually open up doorways to danger. And that's why in the Bible God says, come to me, rather than coming to that. If you look through the Old Testament, you'll see that he's an intensely supernatural God who, for example, everybody goes to the West End and sees Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. That's an example of a servant of God who is able to interpret the dreams of Pharaoh, and as a result of that interpretation, policy is changed in the whole nation. He himself is elevated from being a prisoner to the Prime Minister, and through that good comes to the people. And I now, over the years, have come to believe that God has spoken to me through dreams very clearly, where I've felt the presence of God and heard his direction, angels, etc. And similarly, people have come to me with a dream that's troubled them, and I've been able to help them, I believe, to understand the meaning behind that.
Now, Chris, you've listened to Gordon and Anthony. What do you think's going on here?
Well, I think in Anthony's case, it's quite interesting that we know from kind of research looking at dream interpretation that people will tend to have dreams that fit the framework that they adopt. So, for example, people who are undergoing Freudian psychotherapy start to dream in terms of lots of Freudian symbols. If you're undergoing Jungian psychotherapy, suddenly all these archetypes seem to be appearing in your dreams. So we know that your belief system can actually affect the content of your dreams. I mean, if Anthony finds it useful to interpret those dreams as a way of guiding him through life and even doing the same for his parishioners, well, I'm not going to object to that, but I don't think there's any kind of objective reality to it.
So he believes in angels as part of the structure of his life, so it's hardly surprising that he will dream of angels.
Exactly. You can guarantee that people in other cultures, if they have dreams, they will involve the deities of their particular culture. They won't involve Christian symbolism that Anthony sees. That, for me, suggests that we're dealing with a culture-bound phenomenon. We're not dealing with something that relates to eternal truths.
Anthony?
Many of the symbols that I would see in dreams and when I interpret, I would go back to, not to my own culture, but actually to the Bible and to see how dreams were interpreted then. Angels did appear in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Christmas time, it's all about angels appearing. I don't just think it's a cultural thing. I think it's about the source of communication.
But it's interesting to me that if you go back to the Old Testament, New Testament times, it was expected that that sort of thing happened. That was part of their worldview. Why we sort of bulk a little bit about what you're describing is that it's completely different from the worldview that is accepted by most people today.
In this nation, perhaps, if you travel as I've travelled in India and in Africa and all kinds of other places, people there are a lot more aware of this interchange between what we would say that's real because it's physical and I can touch it, taste it, feel it, see it. And actually in those places people are aware often because death is so close that life therefore is also a lot less cut and dried, rationalistic. And that again is the world of the Bible. Joseph was surprised by his dream. So I think I'd want to counter the idea that this is something that they just expected to happen.
What about Gordon's experience, Chris? What do you make of that?
I've seen Gordon in action. He's either a very, very good fake or just maybe the real thing. Because some of the times when I've seen Gordon doing readings, he's come up with things which struck me as being too specific to just be explained in terms of the kind of cold reading techniques which con artists can typically employ. Now, it might be that we're actually dealing with a situation where you've got a mix of those things, so that there are times when Gordon might actually resort to using cold reading techniques which would involve kind of making generalizations and ambiguous statements and various other kinds of techniques, but that other times he feels he's really actually tuning into something. I have tested lots of psychics in the past. We always find that no matter how confidently they go in to undergo the test, and we make the test as fair as we possibly can, when we actually try to evaluate whether they really can do what they think they can do, it turns out that actually they can't. Now, I'd be fascinated to know what would happen if we tried that with Gordon.
Gordon?
I've actually worked in countries like Japan where I've given messages in parts of their language that I could never have known. I've talked about things in their customs and in their lives that basically are nothing to do with my Western life and they've never been in my brain.
Anthony, you come from a very different sort of religious tradition from Gordon's, and I'm quite intrigued to know, do you think that his experience is valid? Do you believe that he could actually be communicating with the spirits of dead people?
Throughout the Bible, there's mention of people being able to communicate with the spirits of dead people. However, in every context of that, it's a warning not to. I believe in a supernatural God who is good. I therefore don't find it difficult to believe in a supernatural force of evil. And the Bible again depicts that as being a personal force who has power to be able to influence in this world through spiritual means.
So what Gordon maybe doing maybe real, but it's not necessarily good.
I think it can be a doorway to danger. I think that's the problem.
Gordon?
Well, I think, first of all, you'd then have to assume that I was godless and had absolutely no connection to my Creator to say such a thing, because I don't know how anybody could consider that one person has more connection to God than another. As a child brought up in a non-religious family, the first thing I was naturally, instinctively able to do was pray for people. And I think if that's not spiritual, then I don't know what is. I mean, even my mother and father used to sometimes have to take me out of the churches and chapels, or they'd find me in there. I was always drawn to God. And that was before I even proclaimed that I'd seen spirits or anything.
Chris, is it not true that there could be a logical explanation for all that both Anthony and Gordon have told us?
Well, I personally think so, yeah. And that's what I see my own research as being aimed at. I think there are lots of ways in which we might feel that we've experienced something supernatural or paranormal when in fact we haven't. The vast majority of the experiences that people have that they interpret in those terms, we can provide very plausible and almost certainly true explanations in non-paranormal terms. Whether we can explain absolutely everything, that's the challenge. Is it just possible that amongst all those experiences that people have that they interpret in those terms, that there might be some that do defy explanation in terms of conventional science? Personally, I don't think they do, even though we may not yet be able to offer definitive non-paranormal explanations for absolutely everything. I think we've made a lot of progress, particularly in the last decade or two.
Well, let me remind you that you're listening to Beyond Belief, and today we're discussing the supernatural. Are there events for which there is no rational explanation? Can some people exercise supernatural powers? Is it possible to communicate with the spirits of dead relatives? And how do we account for the rise in interest in things spooky? And with me are Gordon Smith, who's a psychic medium, Anthony Delaney, who exercises what he believes are supernatural gifts within a Christian context, and Christopher French, who's a psychologist and a skeptic. Angela McGee describes herself as a medium, visionary and paranormal investigator. She has daily experiences of the supernatural. She claims to have helped police forces in murder investigations. She was just a little girl when she had her first vision.
I had what they call a visit from my grandmother the night that she crossed over. She appeared at the end of my bed in a beautiful ball of light and waving to me, saying that she was okay and that she'd be back to see me later. But it didn't instill fear in me, because in a very Catholic sense I just knew that she'd died and gone to heaven.
Now, you were a Catholic girl, you were at a Catholic convent school. Did the fact that you were having these visions cause you any problems within that Catholic environment?
I wasn't actually in a Catholic convent school, I was in a Catholic care home. It was when I was a little girl, when I was between 3 and 5 years old. I used to have vivid dreams about the nuns. A nun appeared to me on occasion. She said to me, "You will grow up and tell the world about the spirit." And I've discovered this gift that I've had. Obviously it goes back to, I believe I was born with it basically, a gift to receive communication. There's spirit communication that goes on a daily basis, and I've used it to help solve murders with police.
How do you know you're not deluded?
How do I know I'm not deluded? I'm a very down-to-earth girl. Things happen to me, I question it. My logic brain questions it totally. I don't actually sit around chanting up spirits. They visit. Sometimes I'm asked to go out to people's houses and businesses because they sense a spirit or an energy that causes a lot of negativity and fear. There was a case of poltergeist activity in a chain store shop. To me, it was phenomenal, paranormal. It was so great that I asked for help from a Monsignor and a canon of the Catholic Church. They didn't doubt me, the two spirits that I sensed in the shop. They actually said a mass for them.
As I understand it, you claim to have actually seen Madeleine McCann since her disappearance.
Yes, that's true. I had a vision in the middle of the night. Woke up, heard a little girl crying, "Help me." Actually seen a map at first, a forked road and a place called Monchique. Because it was at the peak of the McCann inquiry, realised it was connected with her, because I did see an actual picture of him in my mind.
I wonder what you think the purpose of that vision was, because nothing came of it.
Because people hadn't connected with me, I haven't gone running to in person, because I know that with that case, every psychic and medium or even deluded person would want to get onto the case. But as I would say, too many cooks spoil the broth.
Don't you think there's something quite distasteful about this couple who have gone through agony, being teased by a psychic's vision of where their little girl might be, or offering some sort of clue which can't be verified.
When you say can't be verified, in my experience it can be verified, and we don't tease because we work with a good heart for all good purpose.
When you look back at your life and these visions you've been having, do you think that it's a blessing or a curse to you personally?
It's a blessing because A, is something that I had to accept, and I found it hard to accept. B, because I didn't understand what was going on. I first ran to the local priest to, well, it wasn't a confession, I just said in a very matter-of-fact way, I said, what would you say about these people who had visitations and premonitions? And he realised it was me I was talking about, and he just said, Angela, take it as a gift from God, but be careful what you do with it. I do believe it is as a gift, and it is to be cherished and nurtured. It's not about empowering yourself, it's not about ego, and it's not about instilling fear into anybody.
That was Angela McGee. Chris, what's going on here in her life, do you think?
Well, again, I wouldn't presume to offer a definitive explanation of what's going on in Angela's life. I do know that, in general terms, people who act as psychic detectives often make much more grandiose claims for their successes than the actual historical record bears out.
Gordon, is there any circumstance in which you would go to the police and attempt to help?
No, I wouldn't go to the police and attempt to help anything. If people came to me and it was for their personal loss, which I actually have done, and there are things where I have been able to do things like that, and on a couple of occasions we have done it, and it has been reported by the family, not by me. Well, they've said this guy helped us find the body of our son and we could have a funeral. It gave us closure. Now, I wasn't there trying to solve a murder case. I was trying to help a mum and dad whose little boy was missing. Different thing. They came to me.
Anthony, she's a Catholic, brought up in a Christian environment, and she believes she's exercising a gift from God. What do you think?
On this one, I'd have to go back to the fact that I was a policeman for 10 years. And actually, for me, I would much rather have somebody who was a physical witness than somebody who came along and said that they felt something. From the best of intentions, somebody can come along and say that they're wanting to help, but actually what you end up doing is generating a whole lot of incident reports that you have to follow up. And the police are never going to turn around and say, well, actually, this person was unhelpful, because, like she said, she's doing it from a good heart.
It seems to me that there is one common element, Gordon, in all people who come to somebody like you, a medium, to try to make contact with somebody who's passed on, and that is that they're dealing with very vulnerable people. They're dealing with people who are at their moment of greatest need. And that puts them at a point of weakness, these people, which can very easily be exploited.
Absolutely. Not all people who do come to mediums are gullible, though. I must say this, they're not. Sometimes they want exacts, or as close to it as possible. But yes, you're right, and people, when they come along in that state, they're desperate. Now, if you have any decency in you at all as a medium or as a person, you're not going to exploit that. If you get nothing, and I can swear this now, I've done it so many times and said, you know what, I get nothing, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to interfere in this because I think I'll only confuse you.
Anthony?
I think I'm going to have to hold the hands up on behalf of the Christian church and say that very often people have not been well served by the church, and this is one of the reasons actually why people do go to spiritualists, etc. It's part of the reason why people are looking for supernatural things, and I believe in wrong ways, is that actually they've not been presented with a caring supernatural God.
But you think they're doing it not just in wrong ways, but in dangerous ways. You think basically what Gordon's doing is dangerous.
People who are trying to help can sometimes, in trying to help, not help. I'm aware of having done that myself. Just because I feel that I'm doing something from a good heart doesn't necessarily mean that the outcome of it will be good. I think that I would steer people away from that and point them back to a genuine personal relationship with a God who loves them.
But what is the danger? What is the danger in what Gordon is doing?
I believe that they could give them false hope. I believe that it could be misleading for them. That just hope without foundation can in the end disappoint a person.
I think you'd really need to look at some of the evidence, not only that I've given, but bona fide mediums who work within the spiritualist religion and practice this and practice it within their churches. And that, I think, sometimes is like a slap to another religion. And I've had it done to me before with the Catholic Church, with the Muslim religion, all sorts of religions. And I think, how would it be if we as a religion started to attack other religions, which we don't? And all of a sudden it's deemed that one religion is higher than another. I think that's really, really looking at religion through the wrong end of the binoculars here, and God too, that God favours some more than others.
Chris, do you see dangers in what Gordon's doing?
To be fair, I think that there can be dangers and there can be benefits. There can be dangers in the sense that you do occasionally hear of real horror stories of people being told things like pregnant women being told that they're going to lose the baby they're carrying, or people being given the date of their own deaths. Now,
Chris, I agree with all of that.
I know you do, Gordon.
I would never allow anything
I know you
like
wouldn't,
that.
and most people who describe themselves as mediums or psychics wouldn't approve of those kinds of readings, but they do happen occasionally. And there can be real dangers if the person who's gone to see the medium actually believes in this stuff, then they can take it very seriously, they can be really distressed. On the other hand, there can actually be benefits. Doesn't mean to say that the belief is true, but if you go and see a medium and they tell you that actually the person that you cared about is all right on the other side, they're at peace now, they're happy now, people can take comfort from that. And I'm not one of those kind of skeptics who says that all of these kinds of beliefs and these practitioners, they're all a bad thing. We have to be empirical about this. We have to say, well, does it actually help some people? And I'm pretty convinced that it helps them to get through a difficult period of bereavement. It doesn't work for everybody.
What, Gordon, if you got a bad message?
I've never actually had that.
Well, does that not suggest that what you're engaged in might be some form of wishful thinking? Because inevitably in life we get good messages and we get bad messages. We get positive messages and we get negative
But I suppose
ones.
it's how you set out what you're doing. If I've got parents come to me, which I often do, where they've lost a kid in a car crash or something, in their head, they're living with a car crash and a son who died in a way that they are helpless. For me to take them beyond the death, if you like, to an afterlife where that kid is not like that. That's the message where my head is concentrated on. I will get that information because I know I'm searching for the one thing that's going to take away the pain from these people's minds, or help to. I can't guarantee it, I can help. And that's what I'm looking for. So I'm not looking for predictions in the future and stuff like that. I'm really not. It's not my business.
Let's move on, because there's been an undoubted increase in interest in things to do with ghosts. We've had Buffy the Vampire Slayer, we've got Merlin, all that sort of thing, the interest in haunted houses. What's going on, Chris?
When people used to ask me this question, what's the reason this sudden increase in levels of paranormal belief? I used to reply, well, actually there isn't one. I think what happened was that the media have kind of realised that there is an appetite for this stuff. And now there is so much airtime to fill. What's actually happened is that people are kind of producing output that satisfies that appetite. And I think it has now actually, ironically, led to a bit of an increase in levels of belief, where some people will think, well, if there's so much coverage of this stuff, there must be something in it, mustn't there?
I think there's more to that than that, though, Anthony. I think this is our need for a reassurance that we are not mortal. I do think that somehow this is filling a void left by traditional religion.
Mm-hmm. The Bible says God has placed eternity in people's hearts. I think that people are longing for answers to questions because we are faced every day with the fact of our mortality. The fact is 100% of us die. It's going to happen. And with that, sometimes people end up looking at vampire stuff and things like that, which it can go from just to being a bit of fun. And I think we're creating problems in society by when evil is spoken of as good, there's a problem.
The underlying motivation for many of these kinds of beliefs is obviously our fear of our own mortality. And what this leads to is a situation where we find it so much easier to believe in things that we want to believe are true anyway. The evidence doesn't have to be that good.
Chris, one of the most frequent questions I'm ever asked is, when we come back from the grave, what will we be like? Can we be like zombies? Believe it or not, people are now asking this. Is there such things as vampires? And honestly, I have to look at some of these really intelligent young people and think, what is happening?
Chris, I wonder, again, as a psychologist, the persistence of belief in the supernatural, does it indicate that maybe in some way we are hardwired to believe that?
I think in many ways we are. One of the reasons that we might believe that these supernatural, paranormal things are happening may well relate to the way that our minds work, insofar as we have evolved brains that are very, very good for survival. We are very good at seeing patterns and regularities around us, but sometimes we see patterns and we think we see meaning where maybe it really isn't actually there. We've evolved brains which allow us to make very quick, intuitive decisions that are usually right and usually enough to keep us alive and help us to survive, but can sometimes be systematically wrong. The idea that if the leaves move on the trees because of the wind, that there must be something that's causing the wind. There must be agency there. I think all of these things can be thought of from an evolutionary perspective, and we can make sense of it. That the kind of supernatural and the paranormal beliefs may just be the kind of price we pay for having minds that actually help us to survive and keep us alive.
There's never been a discovery of an atheistic tribe. There's always been a sense in which people have sought out to understand from the nature of the things around them, to extrapolate back from that to a creator. It's only more in Western rationalistic societies where perhaps we are not comfortable with a God who created us, to whom also we might be in some way accountable.
One of my things with belief is that a lot of people assume that seeing is believing. Like Chris, I think he would love to see really good phenomena, and I know you would. But to me, I think we're all looking at it from the wrong angle. And I think what I'm trying to say is that I don't believe in a life after death. I know there is, because I feel it. My sense of feeling, Chris, is something that is heightened, and it's something that's inherent in every human being. It lies latent, and it's because we're frightened of it. We are not frightened of these things actually existing. We're frightened that they don't exist, and that's why we don't want to question it that deeply.
We must bring this programme to a close, but before we do, I want to ask each one of you to give me a brief illustration of why you think your position on the supernatural is valid. And I'll start with you, Anthony.
For 2,000 years, the Church has proclaimed a supernatural God who has a plan and a purpose for people. For years, I looked into all kinds of New Age practices, some of the things actually that Gordon's involved with. I read about Eastern religions. I didn't find that any of that in any way satisfied me. What I needed was revelation from the outside that I could grab hold of. Ultimately, that's why I'm a Christian.
Chris.
I know from many of the experiments that we've carried out ourselves that perception can be misleading, that memory can be misleading, and that we can sometimes create the illusion of the paranormal in the laboratory that will convince many, many people that they've experienced something beyond normal explanation. Mentalists and conjurers can do the same thing, of course. I think on that basis, until I see something that really cannot be explained in terms of conventional science, then my working hypothesis will be that the supernatural and the paranormal are not real.
Gordon.
For me, it's quite simple, and it's about love. And I can see that whenever I see a family who are reunited with a loved one. I can see the lights come back on in their eyes where they felt soulless, where they felt dead because of this loss. And it tells me that we have something deeper to learn as human beings in this world and the next. And that is that our deepest fear is not that we're insignificant. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure, and we need to start to go and look for that.
Well, there we must leave it. My thanks to Christopher French, Anthony Delaney and Gordon Smith. I'll be back again at the same time next week with another edition of Beyond Belief. I hope you'll join me.